Hi, this is Henry Covert with She Never Slept, and this is another installment of my column Retrodrome, where I look at old, obscure, and forgotten films and books and comics. And this time around, I'm going to do books. I've been doing films, but this summer I'm going to be inaugurating what I call Pulp Summer with Retrodrome, and basically I'm going to cover two authors who are crucial to pulp as we know it. Sax Rohmer and Philip Jose Farmer. One, an old venerated name, and Philip Jose Farmer, of course, was came along at a time when pulp needed revitalizing, and now he's a venerable science fiction writer. Sadly passed away. I did get a chance to meet the man, and he was wonderful. But anyway, I'm going to talk about a character that he has written quite a bit about, and the original novels. The character is Dr. Fu Manchu. And I first encountered this when I was a young child. I was introduced to a Master of Kung Fu magazine, a comic magazine starring Shang-Chi. It's published by Marvel Comics, and it was written by Doug Minch, and I may be still mispronouncing this man's name, and if so, I apologize, Doug. And Paul Gulacy was the artist, and it was like any other comic I'd ever seen before. I think I saw it even before this Durango Shield comics. It was very cinematic and very stylized. The combat scenes were obviously very influenced by Bruce Lee and Enter the Dragon, as was Shang-Chi's appearance. They, however, were not the creators of the character. It started in a title called Marvel Special Edition. Steve Englehart was the writer, and Jim Starlin was the artist. And they did the first few installments, which were very good, but they passed it along to Doug Minch and Paul Gulacy, and it reached even new heights under them. It went on for a few years, and then it kind of hit the 80s, and like a lot of titles in the early 80s were kind of given the boot out, regardless of their fan following, for Marvel. And Gene Day, also not with us sadly, was the last artist on Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu, and did a wonderful job replacing Paul Gulacy. And basically what Master of Kung Fu did was teach me about this character, but not a whole lot. I understood Shang-Chi is the son of Dr. Fu Manchu. Fu Manchu is essentially a man who is evil incarnate. I've got one bookmarked passage that I wanted to read, which is often quoted, though not often quoted in full for a lot of reasons, which I'll go into, only a couple. But essentially he says, this is the main character, Sir Dennis Nayland Smith, and he is the arch foe of Dr. Fu Manchu, and he describes to his friend Dr. Petrie, his sidekick, imagine a person tall, lean, and feline, high-shouldered, with a brow like Shakespeare and a face like Satan, a close-shaven skull and long magnetic eyes of the true cat green. Invest him with all the cruel cunning of an entire Eastern race, accumulated in one giant intellect, with all the resources of science, past and present, with all the resources, if you will, of a wealthy government, which, however, already has denied all knowledge of his existence. Imagine this awful being, and you will have a mental picture of Dr. Fu Manchu, the Yellow Peril incarnate in one man. Now, there's two things I want to talk about the books, which are The Mystery of Dr. Fu Manchu, the very first one by Sax Rohmer. This came out in 1913. And it was followed shortly thereafter by The Return of Dr. Fu Manchu, also by Sax Rohmer. Sax Rohmer is a writer of amazing pedigree, really, because, well, I should say now his legacy is becoming known. Like a lot of writers who did pulp, like Edgar Rice Burroughs, people concentrated on how fast the stories went, how suspenseful they went, but they didn't always concentrate on just what quality of writing these writers were. And now, of course, Edgar Rice Burroughs, H.P. Lovecraft, etc. are now part of our canon of, true literature, so to speak. Sax Rohmer's not quite there yet, but he's getting there. And hopefully these reissues will help usher that in. So, there's essentially, Dr. Nayland Smith is the Burmese commissioner for India. He's like a lieutenant commissioner and a detective. He is to Sherlock Holmes what his sidekick Dr. Petrie is to Watson. Dr. Petrie narrates the stories just as Watson narrated the Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes stories. And Petrie seems like a very likable, affable character. who's, you know, does his best with what he's got to work with and uses wits as well he can, and he's kind of in awe of his partner Smith, who is, you know, dashing and tan and very patriotic. But a lot of times Smith really does bungle the case. I mean, the true dichotomy of the stories is that Dr. Fu Manchu is trying to take over the world in the name of an imperialist China that will rule forever. The stories, because of their time and circumstances, and you'll find this in many pulp writers, such as I've already mentioned, there was quite a bit of racism and xenophobia in these stories. I mean, as read today. And that may be a problem for some readers. So if you're hyper PC, hypersensitive, then please don't read these stories, or read them with an open mind as you can, because it's really a different mindset, a different frame of mind. But what you'll find after a while is that Dr. Petrie himself does not seem to share these feelings of xenophobia. I mean, Smith is kind of just a raging racist, whereas Petrie is so open-minded. He finds himself falling in love with an Egyptian girl named Karamana. I think I'm saying her name correctly. She's a constant kind of MacGuffin in the story. She is always sometimes a red herring. They're never sure if they can trust her or not, because she was a slave of Dr. Fu Manchu. But sure enough, every time, even though Smith doubts her terribly, she comes through and helps save the day, and Petrie becomes more and more obsessed with her loveliness, and he describes in very eloquent phraseology her face and her body and her beauty. And she apparently has feelings also for Dr. Petrie. Dr. Petrie never reveals what he himself looks like, but he must have been at least somewhat handsome to attract, you know, this woman who is kind of, to the Sax Rohmer stories, as Deja Thoris is to the Edgar Rice Burroughs stories, a woman that's just absolutely impossibly beautiful, but totally exotic and, you know, untouchable seemingly. And they finally do get together, I believe, in the later books more permanently. But up to number 2, the book I am at now, I've just finished, The Return of Dr. Fu Manchu, they're still, you know, they're kind of in love, but who knows where anything's going to lead because of what's going to happen next. At the end of the first novel, it seemed as though Fu Manchu has died and drowned to death. This is our cat, Shiva. Hello, make his guest appearance. And, you know, sure enough, though, as soon as we're in the second book, Nayland Smith is nervous, and, you know, he's running around. He has a habit of pacing back and forth nervously, and he's probably more nervous than I am on camera. And basically, Nayland Smith is immediately like, "Come on, old boy," to Petrie, and let's rally the troops. You know, Dr. Fu Manchu is going to dominate the planet. And the thing about the novels is they don't read exactly like novels. To me, they're kind of like Ray Bradbury's Martian Chronicles, where he did a series of short stories and then tied them together in somewhat of an order as a novel. And, you know, the Mars series by Edgar Rice Burroughs began in a similar fashion. And so essentially they are single books, but the first story about Fu Manchu that came out in 1912 was called The Zayat Kiss, which ends up being the third chapter of the first book. It's right after the description I read you of Dr. Fu Manchu. And the Zayat Kiss, basically, someone dies because they touch an envelope. You know, and always the person has a wisp of red or discoloration on their limbs or their face. And so it's called the Zayat Kiss. It's basically the kiss of death. And Fu Manchu basically sets up all of these labyrinthine traps for the heroes. And, you know, there's rat torture, there's the iron jacket, there's the gate of holy wisdom, which is hard to describe. And, you know, essentially there's kidnappings. You know, every other time you think a character like Inspector Weymouth, for instance, an ally of theirs, is dead. He turns up alive, but he's been through absolute hell. And Nayland Smith also is captured and tortured. And so, you know, it's not so much a novel the way you read a novel straight through as it is an accretion of events which pay off in, you know, essentially not a cliffhanger, but kind of a, is Fu Manchu dead? Is he not dead? What's he going to do next? Who knows? You know, Nayland Smith is always ever vigilant and absolutely obsessed with Fu Manchu. And what I was going to say about the racial element is the ironic thing is that even though Nayland Smith is somewhat of a racist, especially against Asians, he, by his own admission, Dr. Fu Manchu is the most intelligent man on earth, and he is a Chinese man. So, you know, take that as you will, as an interesting paradox. Fu Manchu is going to be around forever, I think. He's been eternally popular. There's just something about him, his charisma, kind of like Professor Moriarty of Holmes, you know, all the way down to modern villains. And, you know, I wanted to say that there's a third volume that has been released called The Hand of Dr. Fu Manchu, and next up will be The Daughter of Dr. Fu Manchu. I'm going to do a second installment of these, probably in 2 months, and wrap it up and talk about those two books, if the Daughter one is hopefully out then, and also talk about some of the Jess Franco directed Fu Manchu novels in which Christopher Lee played Dr. Fu Manchu. And so I'm going to save that for next time. But this is chapter 1 of A Century of Dr. Fu Manchu, and I wanted to celebrate it with everyone and talk about these books and talk about how important they are for Titan Books. Titan Books is an incredible publisher out of England, and they are reprinting the entire line of Sax Rohmer novels here. They're reprinting almost all of Philip Jose Farmer's novels, and he is my favorite writer, and he is long deserving of being reprinted and reappraised. And so Titan is really, you know, they're pouring out the Harry Houdini mysteries. They've got a ton of things that are happening. Sherlock Holmes pastiche. On the She Never Slept site, I've already reviewed The Peerless Peer by Farmer, which is a Sherlock Holmes pastiche. So you can find that there if you'd like to find it. You can just type in Peerless Peer and you'll go to it. And so anyway, long live Titan Books, and it's good talking with you, and I'll be back in a couple of months to continue